On Christmas Day, my daughter threw a piece of chicken on the floor and said with a smile, "This is your holiday dinner." The guests burst out laughing, but I remained silent, feeling a cold sense of betrayal. But when I stood up, took a folder with documents and put it on the table, saying, "And this is your holiday gift, daughter," her face turned pale and she began to laugh hysterically. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the dining table, but I felt nothing but cold. Rebecca hadn't looked at me once since we sat down 20 minutes ago. Instead, she leaned toward Linda Patterson, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. "The quarterly reports were absolutely fascinating," Rebecca gushed, gesturing with her wine glass. "I never realized how intricate the supply chain management could be." Linda's face lit up with approval. "Edward always says accounting is the backbone of any successful business. Isn't that right, dear?" Edward Patterson nodded from his position at the head of my daughter's table. "Rebecca has such a natural talent for numbers. We're lucky to have her at Patterson Industries." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Lucky to have her? The woman who used to call me crying about her math homework in high school. The same woman who now managed my trust fund and hadn't spoken to me directly all evening. Michael cleared his throat, attempting to bridge the growing silence. "Dad, how's your retirement going? Any interesting projects?" I set down my fork carefully. "Keeping busy." "That's wonderful," Linda chirped, though her attention immediately returned to Rebecca. "Now, about the Christmas bonus structure you proposed." Rebecca's eyes sparkled as she launched into a detailed explanation of employee incentives. Her animated gestures painted pictures in the air, while her in-laws hung on every word. She might as well have been speaking a foreign language for all the attention she paid to my presence. I watched this performance with growing fascination. When had my daughter become such an accomplished actress? The Rebecca I raised would have included everyone in the conversation. This version treated me like furniture, expensive furniture that couldn't be thrown away, but served no real purpose. "The cost-benefit analysis showed a 15% increase in productivity," Rebecca continued, her voice gaining confidence with each nod from Edward. "Brilliant," Edward murmured. "Simply brilliant." I took a sip of wine and studied their faces. 3 people completely absorbed in each other's company, and 1 man desperately trying to keep his family together. Michael's discomfort was obvious in the way he kept glancing between his wife and me, searching for safe topics. "The Seahawks had a good season," Michael tried again. I replied, not taking my eyes off Rebecca. She was explaining something about quarterly projections now, using terms she'd never known before taking this job. Her hands moved gracefully as she spoke, the same hands I'd held when she learned to walk. Now they gestured past me as if I were invisible. Linda reached over and patted Rebecca's arm. "You're going to go far in this company, dear. Mark my words." The pride in Linda's voice struck me like a physical blow. When was the last time Rebecca had looked at me with such respect? When was the last time she'd sought my approval for anything? The answer came to me with painful clarity. Before Patterson Industries. Before she'd found new parents who actually appreciated her talents. I set my wine glass down with deliberate precision and reached for my water instead. The ice clinked softly against the crystal, the only sound I'd contributed to the evening's symphony of conversation. Rebecca's laugh rang out again, musical and bright, directed entirely toward the couple who'd replaced me in her affections. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd worked my entire career in banking, built a substantial portfolio, and provided for my family's future. Yet, here I sat, reduced to a silent observer, while my daughter performed for her new benefactors. Michael was watching me now, concern creasing his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but Rebecca's voice cut across whatever peace offering he'd planned. "The best part is how supportive everyone is," she said, beaming at the Pattersons. "It's like having a second family." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. A second family? I felt something shift inside my chest, a gear clicking into place that had been loose for months. "More wine, anyone?" Michael asked quickly, already reaching for the bottle. "Please," Linda extended her glass. "This is such a lovely evening. Rebecca, you simply must tell us about that innovative filing system you developed." I watched my daughter's face transform with pleasure. She straightened in her chair, practically glowing under the attention. "Well, it started when I noticed the redundancies in the monthly reporting." Her voice faded to background noise as I studied the scene before me. 3 generations of intimacy from which I was completely excluded. Rebecca's hand rested comfortably near Linda's on the white tablecloth. Edward leaned forward with genuine interest. They formed a perfect triangle of connection, while I occupied the 4th corner like a discarded napkin. The serving platter made its way around the table again. Michael had outdone himself with the presentation. Roasted chicken with herbs, glazed carrots, garlic mashed potatoes. Everything arranged with the kind of care that spoke of genuine effort to create something special for Christmas Eve. Rebecca reached for another piece of chicken with her serving fork. The morsel was perfectly golden, glistening with rosemary and thyme, but as she transferred it to her plate, it slipped. The chicken hit the hardwood floor with a soft thud. Everyone froze for a moment, forks suspended halfway to mouths. The piece lay there beside Rebecca's chair, a small island of holiday dinner on the polished wood. Then Rebecca started laughing. "Oh my," she giggled, looking down at the fallen food. Her laughter grew stronger, more musical. "Look at that poor little thing." Linda began chuckling too. "Happens to the best of us, dear." Rebecca bent down and picked up the chicken piece, holding it delicately between her thumb and forefinger. She examined it with mock seriousness, turning it this way and that in the light. "You know what?" she said, her voice taking on a playful tone. "This looks perfect for someone." She looked directly at me for the first time all evening. "Dad," she announced with a bright smile, "here's your Christmas dinner." She set the floor-soiled chicken piece on the edge of my plate with ceremonial precision. The dining room erupted in laughter. Linda covered her mouth with her napkin, shoulders shaking. Edward's deep chuckle rumbled across the table. Even Michael managed a weak smile, though his eyes darted nervously between his wife and me. "Rebecca," he said softly, but she was already lost in the moment. "It's got that authentic farmhouse flavor now," she continued, delighted with her own wit. "Straight from the earth to your table." More laughter. Linda was practically crying with amusement. "Oh my stars, Rebecca, you're absolutely terrible." "I know," Rebecca beamed, clearly proud of herself. "But Dad doesn't mind, do you? You've always been so accommodating." I stared at the chicken piece on my plate. A small thing, really. A bit of meat that had touched the floor for 3 seconds. Nothing that would hurt anyone. Nothing that mattered in the grand scheme of Christmas Eve dinner. But it wasn't about the chicken. It was about the moment my daughter had been waiting for all evening. The moment she could finally acknowledge my existence. Not to include me, but to humiliate me. To demonstrate for her new family exactly where I stood in her hierarchy of respect. The laughter continued around me like a warm current I couldn't feel. I picked up my napkin and placed it beside my plate with the same care I'd used for 40 years of business dinners. My movements were steady, controlled, professional. "Excuse me," I said quietly. The laughter faltered slightly. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood, with the same sound the chicken had made when it fell. Without looking at anyone, I bent down and picked up my daughter's gift to me. I held the chicken piece in my palm for a moment, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to carry such enormous meaning. The dining room had fallen completely silent, except for the soft jazz playing from Michael's sound system. "I'll just dispose of this properly," I said, my voice level and calm. I walked to the kitchen with measured steps, my back straight. Behind me, I heard the scrape of chairs as they shifted uncomfortably. The disposal unit hummed as I dropped the chicken piece into its mechanical throat. When I returned to the dining room, 3 pairs of eyes tracked my movement back to my chair. Only Michael looked directly at me, his face creased with something between embarrassment and apology. "Dad, he started. "It's perfectly fine," I interrupted, settling back into my seat with practiced dignity. "Accidents happen." But it hadn't been an accident, and we all knew it. Rebecca had already moved on, her attention flowing back to the Pattersons like water finding its natural course. Anyway, about those efficiency metrics, Linda jumped back into the conversation with obvious relief. "Yes, we were so impressed with your preliminary findings." I reached for my water glass and took a careful sip. The ice had melted somewhat, diluting the taste. Around me, the evening continued its choreographed dance of family togetherness. But something fundamental had shifted. The conversation resumed its previous rhythm, but I noticed Michael's responses had grown shorter. He kept glancing at me, searching for signs of damage. There were none visible, of course. I'd spent decades managing difficult clients and delicate negotiations. A piece of fallen chicken was hardly going to crack my composure, but composure and acceptance were different things entirely. I listened to Rebecca explain her innovative approach to quarterly reporting, while I mentally cataloged everything I'd observed tonight. The casual cruelty disguised as humor, the calculated performance for her employers, the complete dismissal of her father's presence until she needed a target for entertainment. My daughter had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who would humiliate her own father for a laugh from virtual strangers, someone who had forgotten that the man she was mocking had spent 30 years ensuring she'd never want for anything. "I should get my medication from the car," I announced during a lull in the conversation. Michael looked up quickly. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just my evening pills," I replied with a slight smile. "Doctor's orders. Don't let me interrupt." I stood again and walked toward the front door, leaving behind the warm glow of the chandelier and the musical sound of my daughter's voice praising her new family's wisdom. The December air hit my face like a wake-up call. Christmas lights twinkled from neighboring houses, each one representing families gathered in their own private celebrations. Some of those families probably had their own tensions, their own small cruelties. But I doubted any of them had just watched their daughter serve them garbage for dinner while her in-laws applauded. I opened my car door and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The silence was profound after the constant chatter of the dinner party. Through Michael's front window, I could see the dining room tableau continuing without me. Rebecca was gesturing again, probably explaining another brilliant insight that would earn her more praise from the people who'd replaced me. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the manila folder I'd prepared so carefully. Inside were copies of documents Rebecca thought I'd never see. Bank statements, wire transfers, credit card bills, a complete picture of how my daughter had been managing the trust fund I'd established for my grandchildren's education. The money that was supposed to secure their future had been redirected to fund Rebecca's new lifestyle. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, a luxury car lease, all charged against accounts that were meant to remain untouched until the children reached college age. I'd discovered the discrepancies 3 weeks ago during my routine quarterly review. At first, I'd assumed there was some mistake. Surely my daughter wouldn't steal from her own children's future, but the pattern was undeniable and the amounts were significant. Tonight's performance had confirmed what the numbers had already told me. Rebecca no longer saw me as her father. I was simply an obstacle to overcome, a source of embarrassment to be managed or eliminated. The folder felt heavier than it should in my hands. The December air cut through my coat like truth through politeness. I leaned against the car door, metal cold against my spine, and watched the warm rectangle of light that framed my daughter's dining room window. Inside, the performance continued without missing a beat. 35 years. That's how long I'd been Rebecca's father. From the moment Margaret placed that red-faced bundle in my arms at Swedish Medical Center, I'd rearranged my entire existence around one simple principle. My daughter came first. The University of Washington tuition that drained my savings account for 4 years, while I drove a 15-year-old Honda. The wedding reception at the Fairmont that cost more than most people's cars, because Rebecca deserved perfection on her special day. The down payment on their Bellevue house that emptied my investment portfolio, because my daughter shouldn't start marriage in an apartment. I pressed my palms against the car's roof, feeling the cold seep through my skin. After Margaret died when Rebecca was 12, I could have remarried. Linda Kowalski from the bank had made her interest clear for years. Sarah Chen from the neighborhood book club had invited me to dinner countless times. Instead, I came straight home every evening to help with homework, attend parent-teacher conferences, and listen to teenage heartbreak over chocolate chip cookies. My breath formed small clouds in the frosty air as I remembered Rebecca's graduation speech. She'd thanked me in front of 500 people, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. "My father sacrificed everything so I could have everything," she'd said. The standing ovation had lasted forever. When had that gratitude curdled into contempt? The answer hit me with surgical precision. 6 months ago. The day she started working at Patterson Industries. Before that job, Rebecca called twice a week. She asked for my advice on investment strategies, listened to my stories about difficult clients, brought the grandchildren over every Sunday for dinner. We were a team navigating life's challenges together. Then everything changed. The first sign was subtle. When I suggested she diversify her portfolio, she'd laughed. "Dad, that's so old-fashioned. Edward says the new economy requires aggressive positioning," Edward says. Those two words became the prefix to every conversation. Edward says traditional banks are dinosaurs. Edward says my generation doesn't understand modern business. Edward says family money should work harder. Each dismissal had felt like a small paper cut. Individually harmless, collectively bleeding me dry of relevance in my own daughter's life. I straightened up from the car, my joints protesting the cold. Through the window, I could see Rebecca gesturing animatedly while the Pattersons nodded with approval. The same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for our conversations now belonged entirely to them. The chicken incident wasn't accidental cruelty. It was calculated demonstration. Rebecca had orchestrated that moment to show her new family exactly where her biological father ranked in her hierarchy of respect. Dead last, somewhere below the hired help. My hands curled into fists inside my coat pockets. 40 years of banking had taught me to read people's motivations with clinical precision. Rebecca wasn't just ungrateful. She was actively erasing me from her narrative to construct a more appealing origin story for the Pattersons. The shy, studious girl who'd needed her father's steady presence had transformed into someone who saw that same presence as a liability to overcome. I walked around to the driver's side of my car, my footsteps crisp on the frosted pavement. The sound echoed off the silent houses where other families were enjoying their Christmas Eve celebrations, without public humiliation for entertainment. But Rebecca had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd forgotten that her father wasn't just some retired banker puttering around in obsolescence. I was Harold Jenkins, the man who'd spent 3 decades analyzing financial irregularities for the largest bank in the Pacific Northwest. And I'd been analyzing hers for weeks. I began pacing the length of my car, my mind shifting into the analytical mode that had served me through countless professional investigations. The emotional wound was still fresh, but my banker's instincts were taking control. Pattern recognition. That's what separated successful bankers from clerks. The ability to see connections that others missed, to identify deviations from normal behavior before they became catastrophic problems. Rebecca's behavioral timeline was textbook suspicious. Month 1 at Patterson Industries. Still called regularly, but conversations grew shorter. She seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly during our Sunday dinners. Month 2. First mention of the Pattersons as more than employers. Linda has such interesting perspectives on investment strategies. Edwards built an empire from nothing. Month 3. Open criticism of my conservative approach to finances. Suggestions that I was too cautious for the modern economy. The beginning of her campaign to discredit my judgment. Month 4. Canceled 3 Sunday dinners in a row. Work emergencies that couldn't wait. Priorities shifting toward company events and Patterson family gatherings. Month 5. Direct challenges to my role as financial trustee. Questions about whether someone more current should manage the Children's Education Fund. The groundwork for complete takeover. Month 6. Tonight. Public humiliation designed to demonstrate my irrelevance to her new benefactors. I stopped pacing and leaned against the car's front bumper. The pattern was so obvious now that I'd mapped it chronologically. Rebecca hadn't gradually grown distant. She'd executed a systematic plan to replace me with the Pattersons. But why the urgency? What was driving this desperate rush to curry favor with her employers? The answer came from my professional experience with embezzlers. They always followed the same progression. Initial theft to solve a temporary problem, escalating amounts to cover previous shortfalls, and finally, desperate attempts to ingratiate themselves with authority figures who might discover their crimes. Rebecca wasn't just stealing my family role. She was stealing actual money. The quarterly financial reports I'd been reviewing as trustee suddenly made sense. The education fund disbursements that didn't quite match the tuition payments. The creative explanations for timing discrepancies. The insistence that modern investment strategies required more flexibility in fund management. My daughter wasn't just ungrateful. She was a thief. I pushed away from the car and resumed pacing, my breath coming faster in the cold air. 30 years of investigating financial fraud had given me instincts that never failed. Small inconsistencies that other people overlooked screamed warnings to my trained eye. The luxury SUV in their driveway that Michael's salary couldn't support. The designer clothes Rebecca wore to family gatherings that cost more than her monthly paycheck. The private school tuition for the children that didn't match the amounts withdrawn from their education fund. Someone was funding Rebecca's upgraded lifestyle, and it wasn't her husband's modest manager salary. I had suspected for weeks, but hadn't wanted to believe it. Tonight's performance had stripped away any remaining doubt. The woman who'd served me garbage for dinner, while her in-laws applauded, was absolutely capable of stealing from her own children's future. The realization hit me with the force of physical violence. Rebecca hadn't just betrayed our relationship, she'd betrayed her own children. The grandchildren I'd established that fund to protect were being robbed by their own mother to finance her social climbing. But she'd made one fatal error in her calculations. She'd forgotten that her father had spent 40 years catching people exactly like her. I walked back toward the car's trunk, my movements now purposeful rather than restless. The emotional processing was complete. The analytical phase had yielded its conclusions. Time for the professional response. Rebecca thought she was playing chess with a doddering old man who'd lost his relevance in the modern world. She was about to discover she'd been playing checkers with a grandmaster. My key turned in the trunk lock with a soft click that sounded loud in the winter silence. The interior light illuminated my brown leather briefcase, positioned exactly where I'd placed it before coming to dinner. Always prepared. That's what had made me successful in banking, and what would make this evening memorable for entirely different reasons. I lifted the briefcase out with steady hands. 40 years of handling sensitive documents had taught me the importance of organization and timing. Inside this case lay the culmination of 3 weeks' worth of careful investigation. Every transaction traced, every discrepancy documented, every lie cataloged with banker's precision. The folder felt substantial in my hands as I opened it to verify the contents one final time. Bank statements from the Children's Education Fund, highlighted in yellow where the numbers didn't match. Credit card bills showing charges that far exceeded Rebecca's salary. Wire transfer records that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning 6 months. My breath formed small clouds as I studied the papers under the trunk light. The amounts weren't trivial. Nearly $40,000 diverted from accounts meant to secure my grandchildren's future. Money earmarked for college tuition and books had instead funded Rebecca's transformation into the perfect Patterson Industries employee, designer handbags to impress Linda, expensive dinners to network with Edward, a luxury car lease to project success she hadn't earned, all of it purchased with funds stolen from 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old James, who had no idea their mother was robbing their future to buy acceptance from virtual strangers. I closed the folder and slipped it inside my coat, the papers crackling softly against the fabric. The weight felt heavier than it should, laden with the responsibility of what came next. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was family betrayal at its most fundamental level, but Rebecca had miscalculated badly when she chose tonight for her public humiliation performance. She'd assumed her father was a broken old man who would accept whatever scraps of dignity she chose to throw him. Instead, she'd revealed her character to someone uniquely qualified to expose it. The trunk closed with a solid thunk that echoed off the neighboring houses. Christmas lights twinkled from porches and windows, each one representing families celebrating together in warmth and love. Soon, the Thompson household would discover what happened when greed masqueraded as gratitude. I straightened my tie and buttoned my coat over the concealed documents. The transformation was complete, from wounded father to professional investigator, from victim to agent of accountability. Rebecca had spent months positioning herself as the superior mind in our relationship. Time to remind her that intellect isn't measured by job titles or employer approval. The walk back to the front door felt different than my earlier retreat. My steps were measured, purposeful, carrying the confidence of a man who'd spent decades delivering uncomfortable truths to people who thought themselves untouchable. The documents against my chest rustled slightly with each movement, a paper heartbeat counting down to revelation. Through the dining room window, I could see the tableau still in progress. Rebecca was leaning forward, probably explaining another brilliant insight to her captivated audience. Michael was refilling wine glasses, playing the perfect host. The Pattersons were nodding appreciatively, delighted with their protégé's performance. None of them had any idea that their Christmas Eve celebration was about to become a lesson in consequences. I reached for the door handle, my banker's mind already organizing the presentation. Facts first, evidence second, conclusions third. Let the documents speak for themselves. Professional delivery, no emotional outbursts. Just truth presented with the same clarity I'd used in countless boardroom confrontations. Rebecca wanted to demonstrate my irrelevance to her new family. Instead, she was about to discover why 40 years of investigating financial criminals had made her father very relevant indeed. The door handle turned smoothly under my touch. The warmth hit my face as I stepped back through the front door. But it felt different now. Artificial, like stage lighting, designed to create an illusion of comfort. The dining room hummed with renewed conversation, everyone apparently relieved that the evening's awkward moment had passed. Rebecca was explaining something about market trends to Edward, her hands gesturing expressively over the dessert plates Michael had distributed during my absence. Chocolate mousse with raspberry garnish, presented with the same careful attention to detail that characterized everything about this household. "Dad, feeling better?" Michael called out as he noticed my return. "Much better, thank you," I replied, moving to stand behind my chair rather than sitting down. The manila folder rested comfortably against my chest, hidden beneath my coat. "Actually, I have something for Rebecca." Linda looked up with renewed interest. "How thoughtful. A Christmas surprise?" "Something like that." I reached inside my coat and withdrew the folder, holding it with the same care I'd used for important client presentations throughout my career. "Rebecca, I thought you might find these documents interesting." Rebecca's face brightened with genuine curiosity. After months of dismissing everything I said, she was suddenly eager to see what I'd brought her. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What is it?" she asked, reaching across the table. I placed the folder in her hands with ceremonial precision. "Financial records. I thought someone with your accounting expertise would appreciate the attention to detail." Edward nodded approvingly. "Harold, how wonderful that you're taking an interest in Rebecca's professional development." "Oh, I've been taking a very close interest," I said, settling back to watch as Rebecca opened the folder. "As the trustee for the Children's Education Fund, I conduct quarterly reviews of all related accounts." Rebecca's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. The others watched with benign interest as she began examining the first page. I could see the exact moment recognition dawned in her eyes. Her face went completely still. "These are—" she started, then stopped, her voice catching slightly. "Bank statements," I supplied helpfully. "From the education fund I established for Emma and James. Quite detailed, don't you think?" Michael was refilling wine glasses, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "That's so generous of you, Dad. The kids' education fund has been such a blessing." "Yes," I agreed, my eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. $48,000 initially, set aside specifically for college tuition, books, and related educational expenses. Rebecca was frantically flipping through pages now, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. The Christmas lights reflected off the papers as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Is everything all right, dear?" Linda asked, noticing Rebecca's sudden pallor. I maintained my position behind my chair, hands clasped behind my back in the posture I'd perfected during decades of difficult client meetings. Professional, controlled, unshakable. "Rebecca seems surprised by something," I observed mildly. "Perhaps she's not familiar with the fund's current balance." The folder crackled as Rebecca's grip tightened on the papers. She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, undisguised panic barely contained behind a mask of confusion. "Dad, I don't understand why you're showing me this." "Don't you?" I tilted my head slightly. "I thought someone in your position would find the transaction history fascinating, particularly the withdrawals." Edward was beginning to sense tension. "Is there some problem with the children's fund?" I smiled with the same calm confidence I'd used when presenting findings to bank executives who'd rather not hear uncomfortable truths. "Why don't we let Rebecca explain?" Rebecca's hands were shaking now, as she desperately tried to close the folder, but the papers seemed to have taken on a life of their own, spilling across the white tablecloth like accusations made manifest. "There's nothing to explain," she said quickly, her voice pitched higher than normal. "These are just routine financial documents, boring banking stuff." But Linda had caught sight of one of the highlighted bank statements, her keen business eyes immediately recognizing the significance of the yellow marker that traced a pattern of unauthorized withdrawals. "Sweetheart," Linda said slowly, "those numbers look quite substantial." I remained standing, watching my daughter's carefully constructed world begin to crumble with the methodical precision of a controlled demolition. 30 years of analyzing financial fraud had taught me that this moment always came when the evidence became undeniable and the perpetrator's composure finally cracked. "Rebecca," I said gently, "perhaps you'd like to tell everyone about the 47 unauthorized withdrawals over the past 6 months." "Unauthorized?" Edward's voice sharpened with sudden attention. As a business owner, that word carried specific meaning. "Harold, what exactly are you suggesting?" Rebecca was gathering papers frantically now, trying to stuff them back into the folder. "This is ridiculous. Dad's confused. These documents they're accurate," I finished. "Triple-checked against bank records and verified through my access as trustee. Each withdrawal properly documented with date, amount, and purpose." Michael had stopped pouring wine entirely, the bottle suspended in his hand as he tried to understand what was happening. "Dad, what are you talking about? What withdrawals?" I walked around the table to where Rebecca sat, my movements deliberate and professional. She flinched as I approached, clutching the scattered papers to her chest like a shield. "Shall I explain, or would you prefer to?" I asked her conversationally. "You're making this up," Rebecca said desperately. "You're angry about earlier, and you're trying to—" "Page 4, I said to the table in general. "Invoice from Nordstrom for a $3,000 handbag, charged to the education fund account. Page 7 shows a wire transfer for $5,000 to cover lease payments on a BMW X5. Page 12 documents dinner receipts from Metropolitan Grill totaling $800 per meal, all billed to accounts intended for your children's future." The silence that followed was profound. Even the Christmas music seemed to fade into background irrelevance. Linda slowly reached for one of the papers Rebecca had dropped. "Rebecca, dear, is this true?" "It's not what it looks like," Rebecca said frantically. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed to. The job requires a certain appearance, and I didn't have the funds immediately available, but I fully intended—" $40,000, I said quietly. "That's how much you've stolen from your own children's future to fund your social climbing." Edward's face had transformed from grandfatherly warmth to the cold expression of a businessman discovering employee theft. "Rebecca, please tell me you haven't been embezzling from family accounts." "Embezzling?" Rebecca's voice cracked completely. "That's a horrible word. I'm not a criminal. I'm your employee. I'm family." Michael was staring at his wife, as if seeing her for the first time. "Becky, what have you done?" I pulled out my chair and sat down for the first time since returning, my movement triggering a subtle shift in the room's power dynamics. The documents spread across the table told their story, with mathematical precision, immune to emotional appeals or social manipulation. "Perhaps," I said calmly, "we should discuss this systematically." I leaned forward slightly, my banker's training taking complete control of the situation. 40 years of presenting financial evidence to skeptical audiences had prepared me for exactly this moment. As trustee of the Children's Education Fund, I have legal authority to monitor all transactions, I began, my voice carrying the same measured tone I'd used in countless boardroom presentations. The account was established with $48,000 specifically designated for Emma and James's future educational expenses. Edward was studying the scattered papers with the focused attention of a man who'd built an empire through careful attention to financial details. "Harold, walk us through what you've discovered." "Systematic unauthorized withdrawals beginning 6 months ago," I continued, retrieving a specific document from the table. Each transaction carefully structured to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. Small amounts initially, 500 here, 800 there. Classic embezzlement pattern designed to escape detection. Rebecca was pressing herself back in her chair, as if she could somehow disappear into the upholstery. "You're making this sound worse than it is. I needed professional clothes for work. I needed to make a good impression." $3,000 for a single handbag, I interrupted, holding up the Nordstrom receipt. $5,000 for luxury car lease payments. $800 for individual dinner receipts at restaurants your salary couldn't support. Linda was examining another document, her business experience immediately recognizing the implications. Rebecca, these amounts, this isn't professional wardrobe. This is lifestyle inflation funded by theft. Theft? Rebecca's voice broke completely. You can't call it theft when it's family money. I was going to replace everything once my salary increased. Edward, you know how valuable I am to the company. You're valuable as an accountant, Edward said coldly, not as someone who steals from children's college funds. Michael had gone completely pale, still holding the wine bottle like a forgotten prop. Becky, our kids' education money? You spent our kids' college fund? I pulled out another set of documents, my movements precise and professional. The pattern escalated significantly in month 4. Larger withdrawals, more frequent transactions, credit card payments, cash advances, wire transfers to luxury retailers, total documented theft, $39,743. The number landed in the room like a physical blow. $40,000, Linda repeated slowly. Rebecca, that's nearly a year's salary. I can explain everything, Rebecca said desperately, but her voice had lost all authority. The position requires certain standards. I needed to fit in with clients, to represent the company appropriately. By stealing from your own children? I asked with clinical detachment. Emma is 8 years old. James is 6. They trust their mother to protect their future, not mortgage it for designer accessories. Edward was organizing the documents with methodical precision, his business mind processing the evidence. Harold, as trustee, what are your legal obligations regarding this discovery? I met his eyes directly. I'm required to report suspected fraud to relevant authorities. In this case, that would include both banking regulators and law enforcement, given the systematic nature and substantial amounts involved. Rebecca's carefully constructed mask finally shattered completely. You can't do this to me. I'm your daughter. This is Christmas Eve. Think about the children. I am thinking about the children, I said quietly. I'm thinking about Emma and James discovering someday that their mother stole their college educations to buy approval from people who never actually cared about her. The Christmas lights twinkled cheerfully around us, illuminating a scene that would forever redefine this family's understanding of trust, loyalty, and consequences. Michael set down the wine bottle with shaking hands. Dad, what happens now? I folded my hands carefully on the table, the same gesture I'd used to conclude countless difficult presentations throughout my career. Now, I said calmly, we discuss accountability. The silence stretched across the dining room like a held breath, broken only by the rustle of papers as Edward methodically examined each document. His business experience showed in the way he processed the evidence, systematic, thorough, building toward an inevitable conclusion. Linda, he said quietly, look at this invoice from Tiffany & Co., $4,000 charged to the children's education account. Linda moved closer to study the paper, her face growing paler with each detail. Jewelry. She bought jewelry with their college money. I reached into my coat and withdrew a second folder, placing it on the table with deliberate precision. I brought copies for you as well. As Rebecca's employers, I thought you should have your own documentation. Edward's head snapped up at the word employers. The shift in his demeanor was immediate and profound. Harold, are you suggesting Rebecca stole money from our family and our business simultaneously? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied calmly. I'm documenting what happened. As trustees, you'll want to conduct your own investigation into whether company funds were also compromised. Rebecca was frantically gathering papers, trying to hide the evidence that was already irrevocably exposed. This is a misunderstanding. Dad's twisting everything to make it look worse than it is. $40,000 isn't a misunderstanding, Michael said slowly. His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Becky, you stole from our children's future. Linda was examining the bank statements with growing horror. Rebecca, these transactions, they correspond exactly with your salary schedule. You were systematically converting the children's money into your personal expenses. I was going to pay it back, Rebecca insisted, but her voice had lost all authority. Once my promotion came through, once my salary increased, there will be no promotion, Edward said coldly. There will be no salary. Consider your employment with Patterson Industries terminated immediately. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Rebecca staggered slightly, gripping the back of her chair for support. "You can't fire me," she whispered. "I'm family." "Family doesn't steal from family," Linda replied with Arctic precision. "Family doesn't betray trust for personal gain. You've shown us exactly what you think family means." Michael was staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "All this time, I thought you were working late for the company. You were working late to cover up stealing from our kids." I remained seated, watching the careful structure of Rebecca's world collapse exactly as I'd planned. 40 years of banking had taught me that consequences were mathematical. Every action created an equal and opposite reaction. Rebecca had spent months systematically betraying her family. Now she was experiencing systematic accountability. Edward was organizing the documents into neat piles, his business mind already calculating damage assessment and liability protection. "Harold, what are your intentions regarding legal action?" "That depends," I said carefully, "on how this situation resolves itself." Rebecca looked up sharply, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time all evening. But I wasn't finished yet. "The money must be returned in full, every penny, and Rebecca's access to any family financial accounts must be permanently revoked." "Consider it done," Edward said immediately, "though I suspect she doesn't have $40,000 readily available." "No," I agreed, my eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. "She doesn't." The Christmas lights twinkled around us, but the holiday magic had transformed into something far more substantial. The magic of justice finally served. Edward was already standing, his movements sharp with businesslike efficiency. "Linda, gather your things. We're leaving." "Wait," Michael stepped forward, his face creased with desperation. "Dad, Mom, please, can't we discuss this as a family?" "We tried that," Linda replied curtly, collecting her purse from the side table. "Your wife spent the evening demonstrating exactly how much she values family." Rebecca lunged toward them, her composure finally cracking completely. "Please, Linda, you know how much this job means to me. I made a mistake, but I can fix it." "A mistake?" Edward's voice cut through her plea like ice. $40,000 in systematic theft isn't a mistake, Rebecca. It's a crime. I remained seated, watching the drama unfold with the satisfaction of a chess player observing checkmate. Every move was playing out exactly as anticipated. 3 days, Edward continued, retrieving his coat. Return every stolen dollar within 3 days, or we file criminal charges. Michael grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, that's impossible. You know we don't have that kind of money." "Then perhaps," Edward said coldly, "you should have married someone who didn't steal from children." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca turned on me with sudden fury, her mask of civility finally shattering completely. "This is all your fault," she spat. "You couldn't stand that I found people who actually appreciated me. You had to destroy everything because you're jealous and bitter." "Careful," I said quietly. "Everyone in this room now knows who the thief is. Don't make them question your character further." Linda paused at the door, her voice carrying 40 years of business experience. "Rebecca, we trusted you with our company, our family, our son's happiness. You repaid that trust by stealing from your own children. Think about that before you blame anyone else." Michael was caught between his departing parents and his wife, his face torn with anguish. "Becky, tell me you can return the money. Tell me there's some account somewhere, some savings I don't know about." Rebecca's silence answered louder than words. "Then it's over," Michael said simply. "I can't choose between my children's future and my parents' business. I won't." "You're choosing them over me?" Rebecca's voice broke completely. "No," Michael replied sadly. "You chose $40,000 over all of us." Edward opened the front door, cold December air rushing into the warm house. "Harold, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll be in touch regarding restitution and legal proceedings." I stood for the first time since the confrontation began, my movements measured and dignified. Justice has a way of finding balance. I'm simply ensuring it does. Rebecca collapsed into her chair as the door closed behind the Patterson family, leaving only the three of us in the ruins of Christmas Eve dinner. The chocolate mousse had long since melted on forgotten plates, testament to how thoroughly the evening's celebration had been destroyed. Michael looked at me with something approaching respect. "Dad, I owe you an apology." "No," I replied, straightening my tie. "You owe your children their education fund." The front door closed again as Michael followed his parents into the night, leaving Rebecca alone with the consequences of her choices. I walked to the door, pausing to look back at my daughter one final time. She sat surrounded by the scattered evidence of her crimes, a fallen queen in a kingdom built on lies. 40 years I worked to give you everything, I said quietly. You threw it away for the approval of strangers. The door closed behind me with a soft click, ending one chapter and beginning another. The rain drummed against my apartment windows with January persistence, each drop marking time in a way that felt different since Christmas Eve. 3 weeks had passed, but the memory remained sharp as broken glass. I was reading the morning paper when the knock came, hesitant, uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who had once dismissed my existence. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca standing in the hallway, her designer clothes replaced with a worn coat that had seen better seasons. The woman at my door bore little resemblance to the one who had served me garbage for dinner. Her hair hung limp around a face that had learned what consequences actually meant. The Patterson Industries termination had been immediate. Michael's divorce filing had followed within days. The bank accounts had been frozen pending investigation. "Hello, Dad," she said when I opened the door. I stepped aside wordlessly, letting her enter my modest downtown apartment. The contrast wasn't lost on either of us. She'd fallen from Bellevue luxury to needing shelter from her father's charity. "Coffee?" I asked, moving toward the kitchen. "Please." She sat at my small dining table, the same table where I'd eaten countless solitary meals while she enjoyed her borrowed lifestyle. Her hands wrapped around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "Michael filed for divorce yesterday," she said without preamble. "I heard. The Patterson lawyers want criminal charges filed." "I heard that too." She stared into her coffee as if it held answers to questions she was finally brave enough to ask. "I lost my apartment. The bank accounts are frozen. I've been staying at a motel, but the money ran out." I waited. 40 years of banking had taught me when to speak and when to let silence do the work. "I don't understand how it happened," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I started with just a few $100s. Professional clothes, I told myself. Nothing wrong with looking successful. Then it became easier each time, and the amounts grew, and I kept thinking I'd pay it back when my next raise came through." "Classic embezzlement progression," I observed without malice. "I saw it dozens of times in my career." "You knew this would happen?" "I knew you'd been stealing for months. The Christmas Eve dinner just provided the perfect opportunity for accountability." She looked up at me then. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. "You planned the whole thing." "I planned to present evidence. Everything else was your choice." We sat in silence while rain continued its patient drumming. Outside, Seattle moved through its gray winter rhythm, indifferent to personal reckonings. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said finally. "Not because I got caught, because I became someone who could steal from her own children." "Apologies are easy," I replied. "Change is difficult." "I know." She set down her coffee cup with steady hands. "I won't ask you to trust me. I won't ask for money. I need to know if there's any possibility that someday, maybe years from now, we could find a way back to each other." I studied my daughter's face, seeing past the expensive facade to the frightened girl who used to seek my approval for everything. Justice had been served. Revenge had been complete. The question now was whether mercy had a place at this table. "The Children's Education Fund must be restored in full," I said finally. "I'll get a job. Any job. I'll pay back every cent. And your relationship with Emma and James comes first. Always. Before career, before social climbing, before everything. Yes. And you'll accept financial supervision until trust is rebuilt. No access to family accounts. No major purchases without approval. Complete transparency." She nodded without hesitation. I poured myself more coffee, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, washing the city clean for another day's possibilities. "There's a pull-out couch," I said, not looking at her. "Temporary arrangement only, until you find work and proper housing." Rebecca's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it seemed to age her backwards, returning her momentarily to the grateful daughter I'd once known. "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me yet," I warned. "Rebuilding trust takes years, and it starts with small, consistent actions, not grand gestures." She smiled then, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since before Patterson Industries entered our lives. "I know, but at least now I know what I'm rebuilding toward." The rain softened to a gentle patter against the windows, and for the first time in months, my apartment felt less like exile and more like the beginning of something new. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.